All right, let's go. Number 10. Nan Madol's Impossible City. In 1828, a Polish-Lithuanian explorer named Johann Stanislaw Kubary became one of the first outsiders to set eyes on a ruined stone city rising from the shallow turquoise lagoon off the eastern coast of Pohnpei, a remote volcanic island in the western Pacific. What he encountered did not resemble the work of any culture known to the maritime ethnography of the era. It resembled something that should not have been there at all. Stacked columns of dark hexagonal basalt, each one shaped by geological forces, but arranged by human hands, rose from the reef in interlocking walls. Canals threaded between them. Jungle vines draped the upper courses, where coconut palms had taken root in the cracks. The local Pohnpeians called the place Nan Madol. They said it had been built by twin sorcerers who had made the stones fly through the air. Conventional dating places the construction of Nan Madol at around 1200 CE, with some sections possibly far older. The complex consists of 92 artificial islets separated by a grid of tidal canals, earning it the modern nickname Venice of the Pacific. But the comparison is misleading. Venice was built by one of the wealthiest commercial empires in medieval Europe, with iron tools, draft animals, an enormous labor pool, and centuries of accumulated engineering knowledge. Nan Madol was built on a remote Pacific island by a Neolithic-grade society, with none of these advantages, and the scale of what they accomplished defies every reasonable estimate of what should have been possible. The numbers are the place to start. The total mass of basalt used in Nan Madol's construction is estimated at approximately 750,000 tons. Individual columns in the outer walls weigh up to 50 tons each. To put that figure in human terms, a single foundation stone at Nan Madol weighs as much as a fully loaded semi-truck. There are tens of thousands of these columns. They are stacked in alternating courses, log cabin style, to heights exceeding 25 feet in places. The walls hold. They have held for 8 centuries against typhoons, earthquakes, and the relentless erosion of salt water. But here's where the standard explanation collapses entirely. The basalt did not come from Nan Madol. The quarry sits on the opposite side of Pohnpei, separated from the construction site by jungle-choked volcanic terrain, mountainous interior, and miles of open ocean. The stones had to be moved, and Pohnpei does not contain, and never contained, trees large enough to serve as rollers for 50-ton loads. There are no draft animals on the island. There are no records of pulley systems, no surviving evidence of large-scale rope manufacture, no remnant earthworks suggesting ramps or staging platforms. The logistical infrastructure required to transport 750,000 tons of basalt across an island and out onto a reef simply does not exist in the archaeological record. It never existed. Modern engineers who have visited the site have come away without answers. The construction sequence requires either a method of transport that has left no trace, or a labor force vastly larger than the island could have fed, or a timeline far longer than the dating allows. The Pohnpeians themselves, when asked, have offered the same explanation for 2 centuries. The stones flew. The twin sorcerers Olisipa and Olosopa sang them through the air and set them in place. It is the kind of answer that modern archaeology dismisses as folklore. It is also the only answer anyone has ever given that accounts for the evidence as it stands on the reef today, where 750,000 tons of impossible stone continues to hold its silent geometry above the turquoise water, waiting for an explanation that has not yet arrived. Number 9. The Hypogeum's resonant chambers. In 1902, workers digging a cistern for a new housing development in Paola, Malta, broke through the ceiling of a chamber that had been sealed beneath the limestone for nearly 5,000 years. What they had punctured was not a tomb. It was not a cellar. It was the upper level of a 3-story underground complex, carved directly into the bedrock of the island, descending 35 feet below the surface, hollowed out chamber by people who had no metal. The Hypogeum of Hal Saflieni had been waiting in the dark since the Neolithic, and the moment lamplight reached its walls, The questions began. The construction dates fall. Between 4000 and 2500 BCE, the builders had stone tools. They had antler picks. They had no bronze, no iron, no wheeled carts, no written language that survives, no architectural tradition that anyone has been able to trace. And yet, they descended into solid limestone and removed an estimated 2,000 tons of stone by hand, shaping the resulting voids into a sequence of interlocking chambers connected by passages, doorways, and stairs. The walls are not rough. They are not hacked. They are smooth and curving, finished with a precision that suggests the builders were not merely excavating space. They were sculpting it. Overhead, across vaulted ceilings, carved from a single mass of rock, painted spirals in warm ochre red still hold their pigment after 60 centuries underground. The numbers alone would qualify the site for this list. But here's where the mystery deepens into something genuinely unsettling. In 2014, a team of acoustical engineers and archaeologists studied a space within the complex known as the Oracle Chamber. They wanted to understand why visitors had reported for over a century that the room produced effects on the body that were difficult to articulate. Pressure in the chest, a sensation behind the eyes, the feeling that a sound, once spoken into the chamber, did not so much echo as occupy the space and refuse to leave. The measurements confirmed what the visitors had been describing. The Oracle Chamber resonates at a fundamental frequency of approximately 110 hertz. Speak into it at that pitch and the entire room becomes an instrument. The walls amplify the voice. The skull vibrates. The chamber answers. 110 hertz is not an arbitrary number. Subsequent neurological studies have shown that sustained exposure to sound at this specific frequency produces measurable shifts in brain activity, suppressing regions associated with language processing and activating regions associated with mood and intuition. The frequency does not relax the brain. It rewires its emphasis in real time. It is, in the most literal sense, an acoustic technology for altering consciousness. And it was carved into the bedrock of a Mediterranean island by people who had not yet invented the wheel. The implications are staggering. To produce a chamber that resonates at a precise frequency, the builders had to control the volume of the space, the curvature of the walls, the density of the surrounding rock, and the geometry of the connecting passages. They had to know, before they began carving, what the finished chamber would sound like. They had to test. They had to revise. They had to understand, at some intuitive or inherited level, the relationship between architectural form and acoustic behavior. Modern architects, working with computer modeling and laser surveys and decades of acoustic research, struggle to replicate effects of this precision intentionally. The Neolithic builders of Halsaflieni achieved it with antler and stone, working blind in the dark, 35 feet beneath the surface of the earth. No one knows what the chamber was used for. No one knows what the painted spirals on the ceiling were meant to depict. No one knows what voices once spoke into the oracle chamber, or what they expected to hear in return. The builders left no explanation. They left only the chamber, still resonating, still waiting for the next voice to find the note. Number 8. The Yonaguni question. In 1986, a Japanese dive instructor named Kihachiro Aratake was searching for new sites to observe hammerhead sharks off the southern coast of Yonaguni Island, the westernmost inhabited point of Japan. What he found in the blue water below him was not a shark. It was a wall, a massive, blocky structure rising from the seafloor, with what appeared to be terraces, steps, and right angles cut into the stone. Arataki surfaced and reported what he had seen. Within months, divers, photographers, and geologists were descending into the channel to look for themselves. What they documented has not stopped being argued about since. The Yonaguni monument rises approximately 90 feet from the seafloor. Its upper surface lies just beneath the waves, close enough to the air that a diver can touch the top of it and look up at the sun through 10 feet of water. The structure is built from sandstone, the same sedimentary rock that forms the cliffs of the nearby island. Its faces are flat. Its edges, in many places, are sharp. Massive, blocky terraces stack upward in a stepped configuration, draped in green algae that softens their outlines but cannot disguise their geometry. There are channels that resemble drainage cuts. There is a depression that some divers have described as a carved face. There are formations that look, to the human eye, exactly like staircases. And this is where the problem begins. If the Yonaguni monument was shaped by human hands, it was not shaped recently. The structure sits below the modern sea surface, and the last time that section of the East China Sea seafloor stood above water was during the final stages of the last ice age, when global sea levels were as much as 120 meters lower than they are today. Sea levels rose to their current position approximately 10,000 years ago. Anything carved into that sandstone before the water arrived would have to have been carved by people working in open air during the Ice Age. People who, according to the conventional timeline, were nomadic hunter-gatherers with no agriculture, no permanent settlements, and no tradition of monumental stonework of any kind. Masaki Kimura, a marine geologist at the University of the Ryukyus, has spent decades diving the site and mapping its features. His conclusion is that the monument is at least partially man-made. He has identified what he interprets as quarry marks, carved channels, and intentional shaping. He has argued, in published work and in interviews, that Yonaguni is the remnant of a sophisticated culture that existed before the floodwaters came. Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University, better known for his work on the weathering of the Sphinx, has dived the same site and reached a different conclusion. Schoch argues that the sandstone of Yonaguni naturally fractures along straight planes and right angles. Sedimentary bedding combined with regional tectonic stress can produce terraces, steps, and walls that look engineered, but are not. He sees a striking natural formation. He does not see a building. Both men are credentialed. Both have seen the stone with their own eyes. Both cannot be correct. What makes the Yonaguni question particularly unsettling is the size of what hangs on the answer. If Schoch is right, the monument is a beautiful accident of geology, and the human story remains intact. If Kimura is right, the implications are seismic. Sophisticated stonework would be pushed back into the Ice Age. An entire chapter of human capability would have to be inserted into a period the textbooks describe as pre-civilizational. The builders, whoever they were, would have watched their work disappear beneath the rising sea, and then they themselves would have disappeared from the record so completely that we cannot say with certainty whether they ever existed at all. The stone is still down there. Divers visit it every season. The algae grows back over the terraces, and the answer waits in the dark water. Number 7. The Osirians' buried granite. Behind the Temple of Seti, the first at Abydos, roughly 280 miles south of Cairo, there is a structure that does not belong to the chronology Egyptologists have spent 2 centuries constructing. It sits below the surrounding ground level, sunken into the bedrock like something the desert tried to bury and failed. Groundwater pools permanently in its lower chambers. Red granite pillars rise from the dark water in 2 parallel rows, weathered by millennia of submersion, their surfaces stained by the slow chemistry of standing water. This is the Osirian, and almost nothing about it matches the architectural language of dynastic Egypt. The structure was identified in 1903 by Flinders Petrie and Margaret Murray during excavations behind Seti I's temple complex. What they uncovered did not resemble the temple above it. The Osirian was built from massive red granite blocks, weighing up to 100 tons each, quarried at Aswan over 100 miles up the Nile, and somehow transported, lowered, and assembled in a chamber sunk into the earth. The central hall features 17-foot-tall monolithic pillars, each carved from a single block of granite. These pillars support architraves, horizontal granite beams spanning the gaps between columns. that weigh dozens of tons in their own right. There is no mortar. There is no decoration on the core structure. There are no hieroglyphs on the megaliths themselves, no cartouches, no royal inscriptions claiming credit. Egyptian builders almost never resisted the urge to sign their work. Here, the stone is silent. The masonry style is cyclopean. That word means something specific in archaeology. It describes construction using megaliths so large that later cultures attributed them to giants or cyclopes because human builders seemed inadequate to the task. The Osirion's cyclopean style appears nowhere else in dynastic Egyptian architecture. The polished granite blocks fit against each other, with joints that mirror the masonry at Sacsayhuamán and the foundation courses at Baalbek, sites separated by oceans, and, supposedly, by millennia. The pyramid builders of the 4th dynasty did not build like this. The temple architects of the New Kingdom did not build like this. The Osirion stands alone in the Egyptian record, surrounded by stylistic relatives that exist only on other continents. This is where the standard chronology begins to fracture. The conventional dating attributes the Osirion to Seti I, around 1290 BCE, treating it as a cenotaph honoring the god Osiris. But the structural evidence resists this assignment. The Osirion sits dozens of feet below the level of the Seti temple. Its foundations are cut into the bedrock at a depth that suggests it was already ancient when the temple above it was planned. The groundwater that floods its lower chambers today did not pool at that level when Seti's architects worked. Some researchers, including British engineer John Anthony West and a number of independent geologists, have argued that the Osirion's architectural language and stratigraphic position place it thousands of years before the First Dynasty, in a pre-dynastic era for which Egypt's official history has no record of monumental construction. The implications are difficult to absorb. If the Osirion predates the pharaonic civilization that surrounds it, then the temple of Seti I was built on top of a structure whose builders the Egyptians themselves no longer remembered. Seti's architects would have been the latecomers, the inheritors, raising a sandstone temple over a granite mystery they could not equal. The hieroglyphic record offers no explanation. No king claims the Osirion. No inscription names its architects. The 100-ton blocks were dragged from Aswan by people who left no signature, lowered into the earth for reasons no surviving text describes, and abandoned to the slow rise of the water table. The granite is still there. The pillars still hold the architraves above the dark surface. And the question of who actually built the foundation beneath Egypt's foundation remains unanswered in the silt. Number 6. Puma Punku's machine cuts. High in the Bolivian Andes, at 12,800 feet of altitude, where the air carries roughly 2/3 the oxygen of sea level, lies a field of scattered stone that has unsettled engineers for over a century. Puma Punku is part of the larger Tiwanaku complex, conventionally dated to around 536 CE, though a growing body of researchers argues the original construction may be considerably older. The site sits on a barren altiplano where the wind never stops, the sky pressing down a deep, oxygen-starved blue. And across the ground, in apparent disorder, lie blocks of andesite cut with a precision that does not belong to the world that supposedly produced them. Andesite is one of the hardest stones on Earth. It rates between 6 and 7 on the Mohs scale, harder than iron, hard enough to resist most modern hand tools. To shape it, contemporary stonemasons reach for diamond-tipped saws, tungsten carbide bits, and industrial grinders cooled by continuous water flow. Without those tools, andesite resists. It chips, it fractures, it refuses to take a clean edge. And yet Puma Punku's blocks display perfectly straight cuts. Right angles measured to fractions of a degree. Surfaces polished to a finish that catches the high-altitude sun. H-shaped stones with interlocking notches so uniform they appear stamped from a mold. Drilled holes spaced with mechanical regularity along the edges of certain blocks. Each hole the same depth, the same diameter, the same angle of entry. grooves cut into the stone with parallel walls that hold their dimension over the entire length of the cut. The implications are staggering. In 2013, mechanical engineers examining high-resolution scans of the H blocks noted that the internal angles match each other across separate stones to within tolerances that would require, in modern practice, computer-controlled machining. The blocks were designed to lock together. Each notch on one stone corresponds to a notch on its neighbor, with a precision that suggests the entire structure was prefabricated to a master plan and then assembled like a kit. This is not the masonry of people learning to work stone. This is the output of a system. But here's where the conventional explanations fail. The andesite used at Puma Punku did not originate at Puma Punku. The nearest source quarries lie between 6 and 50 miles away, depending on which blocks one examines, and the route from quarry to site crosses some of the most punishing mountainous terrain in South America. Steep gradients, loose scree, river crossings, passes that exceed the altitude of the site itself, and the stones being moved are not modest. Some of the largest blocks at Puma Punku exceed 130 tons. A single one of them weighs more than a fully loaded semi-truck, more than a blue whale calf, more than a small commuter aircraft. They were dragged, lifted, or somehow transported across miles of broken Andean landscape by people who, according to the Orthodox timeline, possessed no wheel, no draft animals capable of the task, and no metallurgy beyond the working of soft copper and bronze. The reddish-brown and gray blocks now lie scattered, as if something violent rearranged the site, but the cuts they bear remain pristine. Run a hand along one of the polished faces, and the surface is glass smooth. Bring a straight edge to the right angles, and the steel meets stone with no daylight between them. The grooves still hold their parallel walls. The drilled holes still measure identically across blocks separated by tens of meters. Modern stone-cutting specialists who have examined Puma Punku in person tend to describe what they see in cautious, almost reluctant terms. The cuts appear to require diamond-tipped tools. The polish appears to require abrasive compounds applied under sustained mechanical pressure. The geometric consistency appears to require measurement instruments more sophisticated than the simple plumb lines and squares attributed to the era. None of these things existed, according to the accepted record, in the Andes of the first millennium CE. None of them existed anywhere in the Americas before European contact. And yet the evidence sits in the dirt at 12,800 feet, indifferent to the chronologies built around it. What makes Puma Punku particularly disturbing is not any single block. It is the pattern. The site does not contain one anomalous stone. It contains hundreds. The precision is not occasional. It is systemic. Whoever cut these stones did it repeatedly, at scale, with a consistency that implies an industrial process operating in a place and time where industry, by every accepted definition, did not exist. The people who built Puma Punku are gone. Their language, their methods, their tools, the workshops where the blocks were finished, all of it has been erased from the record by the centuries that followed. What remains is the stone itself, scattered across a wind-swept plateau, holding its impossible angles to the sky, waiting for someone to explain how it came to bear cuts that the world it belonged to should never have been able to make. Number 5. Baalbek's 800-ton stones. In the Bekaa Valley of eastern Lebanon, beneath the Roman ruins of the Temple of Jupiter, sit 3 limestone blocks so massive that no crane operating today can routinely lift them. They are called the Trilithon. Each block weighs an estimated 800 tons. They rest in the foundation course of a structure the Romans built in the 1st century CE, but the Romans did not place them there. The Trilithon was already in position when Roman engineers arrived. They built their temple on top of a foundation that predated their empire by an unknown span of centuries. The numbers, as always, are where the conventional explanations begin to fracture. 800 tons, the weight of a fully loaded Boeing 747. The weight of roughly 500 modern automobiles compressed into a single rectangular block of sun-bleached, honey-colored limestone. The 3 blocks of the trilithon were quarried from a site nearly a mile from the temple platform. They were transported uphill across uneven terrain. They were raised more than 20 feet above ground level and placed with such precision that the joints between them remain tight after 2,000 years of earthquakes, wars, and weathering. And a mile away in the quarry itself lies something worse. The stone of the pregnant woman, still half embedded in the bedrock where it was cut, abandoned before extraction was complete. It weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. A nearby block, discovered in 2014, may exceed 1,650 tons. These were not anomalies. These were the working scale of whoever quarried at Baalbek. But here's where the engineering reality refuses to cooperate with any conventional timeline. The largest land-based cranes in operation today, the Mammoet PTC series, and similar specialized lift systems, can theoretically handle loads in the 800-ton range under controlled industrial conditions. They require steel-reinforced ground pads, months of preparation, computer-balanced counterweights, and flat prepared transport routes. They cannot operate on slopes. They cannot move uphill while loaded. A modern construction firm asked to relocate an 800-ton limestone block a mile uphill and lift it 20 feet into a foundation course would consider the project at the absolute edge of feasibility and would price it in the tens of millions of dollars before the first stone moved. The builders of the trilithon performed this operation 3 times, with 3 blocks, without combustion engines, without hydraulic systems, without steel cables, without any technology that has survived in the archaeological record of the region. The Roman explanation, repeated for centuries in the academic literature, holds that Roman engineers using wooden rollers, hemp ropes, and slave labor moved the blocks into position as part of the temple construction. The explanation has the comfort of plausibility. It also has the problem of contradicting Roman engineering itself. Nowhere else in the entire Roman Empire, not in Rome, not in Constantinople, not in any imperial monument from Hadrian's Wall to the Egyptian frontier, did Roman builders work at this scale. The largest stones in the Colosseum weigh under 10 tons. The largest blocks in the Pantheon weigh under 80. The Romans, masters of concrete and architectural ambition, never again attempted anything close to 800 tons. The trilithon stands as an isolated outlier in their entire architectural history, which suggests strongly that it does not belong to their history at all. What lies beneath the Roman temple is older. How much older is the question no excavation has yet answered. The Cyclopean masonry style of the trilithon, irregular, gargantuan, fitted without mortar, matches no Roman construction technique, but resembles megalithic work found at sites separated by oceans and millennia. Whoever placed those 3 blocks understood weight, leverage, and transport at a level that modern engineering can barely match with hydraulics and steel. The trilithon is still there. You can stand beside it in the Lebanese sun and put your hand against limestone, warmed by the same light it has absorbed for thousands of years. The blocks have not moved. The joints have not separated. The builders are gone, and they left no instructions, no inscriptions, no record of how they accomplished what they accomplished. They left only the stones, 3 of them, sitting exactly where they were placed by hands that understood something modern engineering has forgotten how to do. Number 4. Sacsayhuamán's razor-thin joints. In 1533, when the first Spanish conquistadors rode into the Andean highlands above Cusco, they encountered a fortress that defied every assumption they carried about what indigenous Americans were capable of building. The walls zigzagged across the hillside in 3 colossal tiers of stone, some blocks taller than a man on horseback, fitted together with such precision that the soldiers could not understand what they were looking at. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Sancho, writing in the immediate aftermath of the conquest, recorded that the stones were so perfectly joined, no mortar held them in place, and yet no blade could be slipped between them. He compared the construction to the work of demons. He had no other framework available. Sacsayhuamán sits at 12,000 feet above sea level on a ridge overlooking the former Inca capital. The Inca themselves claimed credit for the structure, and substantial portions of the complex were certainly built or modified during their imperial period in the 15th century. But archaeologists, including those affiliated with the Peruvian Ministry of Culture, have long noted that the lowest and largest courses of stone appear stylistically and technically distinct from the upper sections. The Cyclopean foundation blocks may predate the Inca by an unknown margin. Whoever placed them was building at a scale and tolerance the later imperial masons could approach, but never match. The largest stones in the lower terraces weigh up to 200 tons. They are limestone and andesite, quarried from sources several kilometers away, hauled uphill to an altitude where the air carries roughly 2/3 the oxygen of sea level, and then shaped into polygonal forms with as many as 12 distinct angles per block. Not rectangles, not squares. 12-sided puzzles, each unique, each fitted against neighbors with equally unique geometries. Every angle of every stone corresponds to a complementary angle on the adjacent stone. The blocks do not simply rest against each other. They interlock. A razor blade cannot fit between them. This claim, repeated by every researcher who has visited the site, is not a romantic exaggeration. It is a measurable fact. Modern stonemasons working with diamond saws, laser measurement systems, and CAD modeling have attempted to reproduce single Sacsayhuamán joints under controlled conditions, and have failed to achieve the tolerance present across tens of thousands of square meters of ancient wall. The numbers are difficult to absorb. Engineers studying the site have calculated that the precision of the joints across irregular polygonal stones approaches tolerances of less than a millimeter in some sections. Achieving this fit on a single block, on a workshop floor, with electricity and tungsten carbide tooling, takes a modern mason days. The builders of Sacsayhuamán did it thousands of times, on stones weighing as much as a fully loaded tractor trailer, on the side of a mountain. But here's where the conventional explanations fail. The standard model proposes that Andean stonemasons shape the blocks through patient abrasion with harder stones, fitting each one to its neighbor through a process of trial and error grinding. The model is plausible for individual stones. It collapses when applied to the wall as a whole. A 200-ton block cannot be repeatedly lifted, lowered, marked, lifted again, ground down, and replaced. The energy cost is prohibitive. The handling infrastructure required, ramps, scaffolds, lifting frames at high altitude, leaves no archaeological trace, and the finished surfaces show none of the tool marks that abrasion fitting would inevitably leave. The blocks are smoothed to an almost rounded finish, their edges softened, their faces gently convex, as if the stone had been worked to a state somewhere between sculpture and erosion. The tan and gray walls zigzag across the hillside in a pattern that engineers have noted distributes seismic load with extraordinary efficiency. When Cusco shakes, and it shakes often, the colonial Spanish churches built atop Inca foundations crack and collapse. The foundations themselves do not. Centuries of earthquakes that have leveled stone construction throughout the Andes have left Sacsayhuamán's lower walls intact. The interlocking polygonal geometry absorbs the shaking. The stones rock against each other and settle back into place. Whoever designed this understood seismic engineering at a level the modern world only formalized in the 20th century. They left no manuals. They left no diagrams. They left only the walls themselves, still standing above Cusco, still refusing to admit a razor blade between their joints. Number 3. Stonehenge's impossible logistics. On Salisbury Plain in southern England, a ring of towering gray sandstone pillars stands weathered with lichen, casting long shadows across the chalk grassland as the sun moves through its annual arc. The monument is so familiar it has become almost invisible. A postcard, a logo, a silhouette stripped of its weight by overexposure. But familiarity is not understanding. The longer engineers examine what was actually accomplished on this plain, the more the monument resists the casual glance it has been given for centuries. Construction began around 3000 BCE. The largest stones, the sarsens, were erected around 2500 BCE, 500 years into a building project that spanned generations who would never see its completion. The sarsen blocks weigh up to 25 tons each. They were quarried from a site roughly 20 miles north of the plain and dragged across a landscape of woodland, marsh, and river valley by a population that possessed neither the wheel nor draft animals trained to the task. 25 tons is the weight of 4 adult African elephants. The Neolithic builders moved dozens of them. But the sarsens are only half the problem. The smaller stones at Stonehenge, the blue stones, weighing roughly 4 tons apiece, were transported over 150 miles from the Preseli Hills in western Wales. Not across flat terrain, across mountains, across rivers, across the Bristol Channel, or through the long inland routes that skirt it. 4 tons is the weight of a small truck. The Neolithic builders moved approximately 80 of them across a third of the island of Britain, using ropes, wooden sledges, and human muscle. The standard explanation invokes log rollers, A-frames, and large coordinated labor forces. The mathematics of these models produce timelines stretching into decades for a single stone. The geography produces obstacles for which no convincing solution has been proposed. The Severn estuary alone presents a crossing problem that has defeated every reconstruction attempt undertaken with period-accurate technology. Experimental archaeology teams equipped with Neolithic tools and methods have managed, after enormous effort, to move single replica stones across short, prepared courses. Scaling that effort to 80 bluestones over 150 miles of unimproved Bronze Age landscape produces numbers that strain belief. But here's where the engineering problem becomes genuinely strange. The horizontal lintels capping the sarsen circle are not simply laid across the uprights. They are locked in place using mortise and tenon joints. Projections on the uprights fitting precisely into hollows carved into the lintels. This is a woodworking technique. It belongs to carpentry, to the joining of beams and posts, to a craft tradition developed for material that yields easily to a blade. The Stonehenge builders applied it to sandstone. They carved mortises and tenons into multi-ton megaliths, and then raised those megaliths into the air and dropped them onto their mating partners with enough accuracy that the joints engaged on the first attempt. There is no margin for revision when the workpiece weighs 25 tons. The lintels themselves are curved along their lengths to follow the circumference of the ring. They are tongue and grooved at their ends to lock into adjacent lintels. The entire upper ring is, in effect, a single continuous stone hoop assembled from individually shaped pieces, each fitted to its neighbors with a precision that betrays planning at a scale Neolithic Britain is not supposed to have possessed. And then there is the alignment. The monument is oriented to the summer and winter solstice sunrises with an accuracy that requires sustained astronomical observation across multiple generations before the first stone was raised. The builders knew where the sun would rise on the longest and shortest days of the year. They knew it precisely enough to bury that knowledge in the geometry of a 25-ton ring of stone, where it has remained legible for 5,000 years. What makes Stonehenge particularly unsettling is its location in the standard timeline. This is not a fringe site or an outlier. This is one of the most studied monuments on Earth, sitting at the heart of European archaeology, and the basic logistical questions have never been answered. The bluestones reached Salisbury Plain. The mortise and tenon joints engaged. The solstice alignments held. The builders are gone, and the methods went with them, and the ring still stands on the chalk in the rain, lichen grayed and silent, refusing to explain itself. Number 2. The Great Pyramid of Giza and the precision that shouldn't exist. Around 2560 BCE, on a limestone plateau west of the Nile, a workforce whose name's history did not preserve assembled approximately 2.3 million blocks of stone into a structure 481 feet tall. The Great Pyramid of Giza was, for nearly 4 millennia, the tallest man-made object on Earth. It held that record from the Bronze Age into the modern industrial era. No cathedral, no fortress, no monument surpassed it until the Lincoln Cathedral spire in the 14th century. The pyramid waited longer than recorded history is old to be exceeded. The numbers, as always, are where the dread begins. 2.3 million blocks. The largest among them, granite slabs forming the chambers and structural relieving spaces. Above the king's chamber, weigh up to 80 tons each. That granite was not local. It was quarried at Aswan, more than 500 miles south of the construction site, then transported the length of Egypt, then raised hundreds of feet into the air, then positioned with millimetric care inside a structure already rising around them. 80 tons. The weight of roughly 80 modern automobiles. Lifted, by means we still cannot satisfactorily explain, hundreds of feet above the desert floor, and slotted into a chamber buried inside a mountain of stone. The standard explanations involve ramps. Straight ramps, spiral ramps, internal ramps, ramps of mud brick and rubble built and dismantled as the structure rose. Each model resolves some logistical problems and creates others. A ramp tall enough to deliver an 80-ton block to the king's chamber would itself require a construction project rivaling the pyramid. A spiral ramp wrapped around the exterior would obscure the corner alignments the builders somehow maintained with perfect accuracy. No surviving record from dynastic Egypt describes the construction method. No engineering treatise, no foreman's notes, no sketch on a tomb wall. The largest stone structure of the ancient world was built, and the people who built it left no instructions. But here's where the standard explanations fail in a way most viewers never hear about. The pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees. Not magnetic north. True north. The geographic pole defined by the Earth's axis of rotation. That alignment is more precise than the orientation of many modern observatories. It is more precise than the Meridian building at Greenwich. It is more precise than most surveying performed before the satellite era. Achieving 0.05 degree accuracy on a structure with a base covering 13 acres requires either astronomical observation of extraordinary sophistication or surveying instruments that have left no trace in the archaeological record. The builders of the Great Pyramid did not approximate cardinal directions. They locked their monument to the rotational axis of the planet with an error margin smaller than the width of a thumb held at arm's length. The casing stones compound the impossibility. Originally, the pyramid was not the rough tan staircase visitors see today. It was sheathed in 144,000 polished white limestone blocks, each cut to mate with its neighbors at tolerances reported in fractions of a millimeter. Sunrise on the Giza Plateau would have set the entire structure ablaze, a 481-foot mirror visible from the hills of the Sinai. Medieval earthquakes loosened the casing. Medieval builders stripped most of what remained to construct mosques in Cairo. What survives at the base of the pyramid still shows joints so fine that a knife edge cannot enter them. Limestone, shaped by copper tools and stone hammers, fitted across millions of square feet of surface area with a precision modern masonry rarely attempts. And there is no surviving record of how any of it was done. This is the part that lodges in the chest. The Egyptians documented exhaustively. They recorded grain shipments. They recorded the names of cattle. They recorded the menstrual cycles of palace women. They left us thousands of years of administrative ephemera. But the engineering of the largest, most precise stone monument of the ancient world produced no documentation that has survived. No diagram of the lifting mechanism. No description of the surveying technique that achieved 0.05 degree alignment. No account of how granite blocks weighing as much as 80 modern cars were raised into a chamber hundreds of feet above the bedrock. The pyramid stands. The method does not. What makes this particularly disturbing is the assumption embedded in every standard reconstruction. We assume the builders worked at the edge of their capability. We assume the Great Pyramid represents the absolute ceiling of what 26th century BCE Egypt could achieve. But there is no evidence for that ceiling. There is only the structure itself, and a silence around it that has not been broken in 4,500 years. The pyramid sits on the Giza plateau in the present tense, still aligned, still precise, still refusing to explain itself. And if Giza is the upper limit of what we are willing to believe ancient builders could accomplish, the next entry will demand that we move that limit by 7,000 years.
Number 1.
Göbekli Tepe rewrites history. In 1994, A.E. Daitschut, Kurdish shepherd tending his flock on a dusty hilltop in southeastern Turkey, noticed something strange protruding from the soil. The object was the rounded top of a limestone pillar, weathered but unmistakably shaped by human hands. When German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt of the German Archaeological Institute arrived to investigate, what he found beneath that hillside would dismantle the timeline of human civilization that every textbook had taught for a century. The site is called Göbekli Tepe. It sits on a limestone ridge above the Harran Plain, 22 acres of buried architecture overlooking a landscape that has been arid for thousands of years. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have identified at least 20 circular enclosures beneath the surface, of which fewer than a dozen have been excavated. Each enclosure is ringed by T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing 18 feet tall, the largest weighing up to 20 tons. The pillars are carved with foxes, vultures, scorpions, serpents, boars, and lions, rendered in relief with a stylistic confidence that took later civilizations millennia to develop. The radiocarbon dates returned a number that stopped excavators cold. Approximately 9,600 BCE. The site predates Stonehenge by roughly 7,000 years. It predates the Egyptian pyramids by 7,000 years. It predates the invention of pottery, the invention of writing, the invention of the wheel, and the domestication of every staple grain on which agricultural civilization would later depend. This was not built by farmers. It was built by hunter-gatherers. The implications gut the standard model. For over a century, archaeologists have taught a clean sequence. Agriculture comes first, then settlement, then surplus, then specialization, then monumental architecture. You cannot build 20-ton stone pillars, the reasoning went, until you have a society stable enough, fed enough, and hierarchical enough to organize the labor. Göbekli Tepe reverses the sequence. The temple came before the farm. The monument came before the village. Whatever drove these nomadic peoples to quarry, transport, and erect 20-ton T-shaped pillars on a barren ridge, it was not the surplus of agriculture. It was something else. Something we have no name for. But here's where the standard explanation falls apart completely. The pillars were quarried using stone tools. There are no metal implements at this date anywhere on Earth. There is no evidence of pulleys, no evidence of wheels, no evidence of draft animals trained for hauling. The nearest quarry sits several hundred meters from the enclosures, and the limestone bedrock there shows clear extraction scars where the megaliths were cut free. How nomadic bands moved 20-ton pillars across uneven terrain and lifted them into vertical position remains, in the precise language of the published excavation reports, unexplained. And then there is the final fact. the one that turns curiosity into something colder. Around 8000 BCE, roughly 16 centuries after construction began, the builders of Göbekli Tepe deliberately buried their own site. Not abandoned, not destroyed by natural forces, buried. They filled every enclosure with tons of soil, rubble, and animal bone, carrying it up the ridge basket by basket until the pillars disappeared beneath an artificial hill. Where the spoil came from remains unknown. Why they did it remains unknown. What they were sealing in or sealing out is a question the stones do not answer. The carved foxes still watch from the limestone. The vultures still spread their wings across pillars that were already ancient when the first farmers planted the first wheat. 20 more enclosures remain underground, unexcavated, mapped only as ghostly circles in radar returns. Klaus Schmidt died in 2014, before he could open them. They sit beneath the Turkish soil, exactly where their builders left them, waiting for the moment when we are finally ready to ask the questions their makers may have left behind for us. If you want to see more videos like this, click the video on screen now and make sure to subscribe.